Drop the bags. Now. Don't argue with me.
Officer, I'm holding eggs and milk. I'm setting them down slowly.
You don't get to negotiate. Turn around. Hands on your
I'm
head.
not resisting. You're making a mistake.
Last warning.
Then this is on you.
Officer Kyle Vance had his hand resting on the grip of his service pistol, the safety retention strap already unsnapped. His chest was heaving, adrenaline flooding his system, his eyes locked on the large man standing 10 feet away. It was 10:15 a.m., on a Tuesday in the quiet manicured subdivision of Oak Creek, a neighborhood of sprawling lawns and 3-car garages. The sun was shining brightly, casting long shadows across the driveway, where 2 men from 2 very different worlds were locked in a standoff that should never have happened. Marcus Holloway stood 6'2", with shoulders that still carried the width and density of a man half his age. He was 62 years old, dressed in a faded gray t-shirt that read Fort Benning on the breast-stained cargo work pants and heavy leather boots. He held a yellow crowbar in his right hand, loosely pointed at the ground. He didn't flinch at the officer shouting. He didn't tremble. He simply watched Officer Vance with a look of profound, disappointing appraisal. It was the look a seasoned instructor gives a recruit who has just failed a basic competency test. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that carried more authority than the shouting man in the uniform. "You are making a mistake. I live here. I am replacing a rotted post on my property. Look at the tools. Look at the wood." "I said get on the ground!" Vance screamed, stepping closer, invading the personal space of the older man. "You don't tell me what to look at. We have a report of a burglary in progress. A suspect matching your description tearing down a perimeter fence. Now drop the bar or I will drop you." Marcus Holloway had served 30 years in the United States Army. He had retired as a command sergeant major, the highest enlisted rank a soldier can achieve. He had led men through the deserts of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan. He had been awarded the Silver Star for gallantry and 2 Purple Hearts. He knew what a threat looked like. He knew what adrenaline smelled like. And looking at the 28-year-old officer in front of him, Marcus didn't see a protector of the peace. He saw a frightened, arrogant young man who had lost control of the situation before he even stepped out of his patrol car. "I am going to place this tool on the tailgate of my truck," Marcus said, moving with deliberate slowness. "Then I am going to reach into my back pocket and show you my identification. I am not getting on the ground. I have bad knees, and I have done nothing wrong. Stop moving. Don't you reach for anything." Vance unholstered his weapon, pointing it directly at Marcus's chest. The silence that followed was deafening. The birds seemed to stop singing. A lawnmower hummed in the distance, oblivious to the fact that a decorated war hero was staring down the barrel of a Glock in his own driveway. Marcus froze. He looked at the gun, then back at Vance's eyes. "You are pointing a loaded weapon at an unarmed man on his own property," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "You had better be absolutely sure you are right, officer, because there is no coming back from this." To understand how a routine morning of home improvement turned into a life-threatening standoff, we have to rewind 30 minutes. The call to 911 hadn't come from a passing motorist or a security alarm. It had come from the house directly across the street from the living room of Brenda Miller. Brenda was 55 years old, a woman who spent a significant portion of her day monitoring the neighborhood Facebook group and peering through her blinds. She had lived in Oak Creek for 12 years and considered herself the unofficial guardian of the neighborhood's property values. When she saw a large black man pull a truck into the driveway of the empty house across the street, a house that had been sold 2 weeks ago, and start ripping planks off the fence, her mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. She didn't see a new homeowner doing renovations. She saw a scrapper. She saw a thief stealing expensive cedar wood in broad daylight. She saw someone who didn't belong. 911. "What is your emergency?" "Yes, I need police at 4205 Maple Drive immediately." Brenda said, her voice trembling with self-induced excitement.
There's a man destroying the property. He's ripping the fence down. He has a large metal bar. He looks threatening.
Is anyone living in the house, ma'am? It just sold, but nobody's moved in yet. This man backed a truck up and he's just looting the place. He's big. He looks like he might be on drugs or something. Please hurry. The dispatcher logged the call burglary in progress. Suspect described as black male large build, armed with a metal weapon destroying property. Officer Kyle Vance was 3 miles away when the call came over the radio. Vance had been with the department for 5 years. In that time, he had developed a reputation among his peers. Some called him proactive. Others, mostly the older sergeants, called him a liability. He had 3 complaints in his file for excessive force and verbal abuse. All 3 had been unfounded or unsustained due to lack of definitive video evidence or the credibility of the accusers. Vance believed in a warrior mindset. He believed that every encounter was a potential ambush and that submission had to be established immediately. He didn't see himself as a public servant. He saw himself as a sheepdog protecting the flock from the wolves. When he heard burglary in progress and armed with a metal weapon, his mind didn't process the nuance of the situation. He didn't consider that thieves rarely dismantle fences at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. He just heard threat. He hit his siren weaving through the morning traffic. He was already angry. He was already prepared for violence. He parked his cruiser at an angle across the driveway, cutting off any escape route, and stormed out of the vehicle before the engine had even stopped cycling down. He didn't look for a house number. He didn't look for a sold sign. He saw a black man holding a piece of metal, and he decided that this was the enemy. How often do neighbors escalate situations based on assumptions rather than facts? Drop a comment if you've ever had the police called on you for simply existing in your own space. Back in the driveway, the standoff had attracted an audience, though neither man looked away from the other. Marcus Holloway kept his hands raised to shoulder height, palms open. He had placed the pry bar on the tailgate of his Ford F-150 as promised, but the gun was still trained on his chest. "I asked you for identification," Vance barked, though he hadn't holstered his weapon. "And you're refusing." "I am not refusing to identify myself," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I am telling you that my identification is in my back pocket. You have a gun pointed at me. If I reach for my wallet, you are liable to shoot me because you are frightened and untrained. Holster your weapon, officer, and we can resolve this like adults." "I'm not holstering until you're in handcuffs," Vance yelled. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "For what?" Marcus asked. "I have committed no crime. This is my home. I bought this house 20 days ago. The deed is recorded at the county courthouse. The truck is registered to me at this address. You are trespassing on private property and assaulting a homeowner. You're a suspect in a burglary." "Does a burglar prune the rose bushes?" Marcus gestured with his chin toward the pile of yard waste bags near the garage. "Does a burglar pressure wash the driveway? Use your eyes, son. Look at the scene." Vance's face flushed red. He felt his authority slipping away. In his mind, a suspect arguing back was a suspect resisting. He couldn't back down now. That would look like weakness. He had to win. He had to dominate the space. The fact that this older man was so calm, so articulate, and so dismissive of Vance's power was infuriating. It challenged Vance's entire worldview. "Last warning," Vance hissed, stepping forward, reholstering his weapon but reaching for his taser. "Turn around or you're getting tased." Marcus sighed. It was a sound of deep fatigue, the sound of a man who had fought real enemies overseas only to come home and fight this nonsense in his front yard. "I spent 30 years in the Army, officer. I have been shot at by professionals. Your taser does not impress me, but if you deploy it, you will be assaulting a disabled veteran, and I promise you that paperwork will be heavy." "You want to play the veteran card?" Vance sneered. Stolen valor, I bet. Turn around. You are making a career-ending mistake, Marcus said. He didn't turn around. He stood his ground feet shoulder-width apart, guarding the sanctity of his home. He knew his rights. He knew that in the state of Georgia you are not required to provide ID to an officer unless you are being detained for a suspected crime, and for the detention to be lawful, the officer must have reasonable, articulable suspicion. A man fixing a fence in broad daylight did not meet that threshold no matter what the nosy neighbor said. Vance didn't care about the Fourth Amendment. He cared about compliance. He lunged forward, grabbing Marcus's left wrist. Marcus didn't pull away, but he didn't help either. He became a statue 6'2" of concrete and muscle. "Stop resisting," Vance screamed, struggling to pull the older man's arm back. "I am not resisting," Marcus stated loudly for the benefit of anyone watching. "I am standing still. You are escalating." The physical contact shattered the stalemate. Vance, realizing he couldn't easily overpower the older man through leverage alone, decided to use momentum. He hooked his leg behind Marcus's knee and shoved hard against his chest. It was a cowardly move, but effective. Marcus, who had 2 replaced knees from years of jumping out of airplanes, buckled. He went down hard, his shoulder slamming into the gravel driveway. Pain shot through his body, but he didn't cry out. He didn't strike back. He knew that if he raised a hand to protect himself, if he even brushed against the officer's utility belt, the narrative would shift to assault on a police officer. He had to take the abuse to prove the injustice. Vance was on top of him instantly, a knee driving into the small of Marcus's back, pressing the air out of his lungs. "I told you," Vance panted, adrenaline making his movements jerky and violent. "I told you to comply." He wrenched Marcus's arms behind his back, twisting the shoulders to a painful angle. The handcuffs clicked once, twice. They were ratcheted down tight, biting into the skin. "You are breaking my wrist," Marcus said, his face pressed into the dirt of his own driveway. "Loosen the cuffs." "Shut up," Vance yelled. "You're under arrest for obstruction, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct." "And the burglary?" Marcus asked, his voice muffled but dripping with irony. "Did you forget about the burglary you're supposed to be investigating?" Vance didn't answer. He hauled Marcus up by the chain of the handcuffs, forcing the older man to stumble to his feet. Marcus's t-shirt was torn. There was dirt on his face and blood trickling from a scrape on his cheek. He looked at his house, then he looked at Vance. "My wallet," Marcus said calmly. "Back right pocket. Check it." "I'll check it at the station," Vance spat. "You're done talking." Marcus looked directly into the officer's body camera, which was mounted on the center of his chest. "My name is Command Sergeant Major Marcus Holloway. I am being unlawfully arrested on my own property by Officer Vance. I have offered identification multiple times. I have offered proof of residence. This officer has used excessive force against a compliant senior citizen. Note the time." Vance shoved him toward the patrol car. "Get in." He slammed the door on a man who had commanded battalions. He slammed the door on a man who had buried friends. He slammed the door on the truth, believing that his badge gave him the power to rewrite reality. But he had forgotten one thing: in the age of technology, eyes are everywhere. Across the street, Brenda Miller had stopped peering through the blinds and had come out onto her porch looking confused. This wasn't what she expected. She expected the police to run a license plate, maybe issue a warning. She didn't expect to see a man being tackled in his driveway. But next door to Marcus, another neighbor had emerged. Robert Sullivan, 68, a retired corporate attorney, was standing on his lawn with his phone held high, recording everything. He had seen Marcus moving in 2 weeks ago. He had brought over a bottle of wine to welcome him. He knew exactly who Marcus was. "Officer!" Robert shouted, walking toward the driveway as Vance tried to stuff Marcus into the back of the cruiser. "Officer, stop. You have the wrong man. That is his house." Vance spun around, pointing a finger at Robert. Back away. Stay back or you'll be next. This is an active crime scene. It is not a crime scene, Robert yelled back, his lawyer voice projecting clearly. That is Marcus Holloway. He owns the property. I witnessed him closing on the house. You are making a massive liability error, officer. I am recording this. I said back away. Vance took a step toward Robert, hand hovering near his taser again. Interfering with a police investigation is a felony. Do you want to go to jail too? Robert stopped, knowing better than to provoke an unstable officer, but he kept the camera rolling. I am standing on my property, exercising my First Amendment rights. I am not interfering. I am documenting a civil rights violation. Marcus, from the back seat of the cruiser, locked eyes with Robert and gave a single, slow nod of gratitude. He didn't speak. He sat upright, despite the pain in his shoulders and knees. He maintained his dignity, even in the cage. Vance jumped into the driver's seat, slamming his own door. He was breathing hard, sweating profusely. His hands shook slightly as he put the car in gear. He felt a nagging seed of doubt in his stomach. The neighbor had been very confident, but he crushed it down. He was the law. The suspect had resisted. That was enough. He had to justify the arrest now. If he backed down, he would be admitted. He was wrong, and Kyle Vance did not admit he was wrong. He peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching slightly, leaving the crime scene behind. The scene where the burglar had left a half-finished fence repair and a neatly organized toolbox. As the cruiser merged onto the main road, Marcus spoke from the back, his voice calm and terrifyingly devoid of fear. Officer Vance, when we arrive at the precinct, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that I gave you every opportunity to de-escalate. You chose this path. Shut up back there, Vance said, turning up the radio to drown him out. Do you think body cameras should be live-streamed to supervisors during arrests to prevent situations like this? Let us know your thoughts. The ride to the precinct took 15 minutes. Vance drove aggressively, cutting through traffic, trying to maintain the adrenaline high that was slowly crashing into anxiety. He radioed ahead. 1 in custody. Resisting obstruction. Large male hostile. Hostile. Marcus whispered to himself in the back seat, shaking his head. When they arrived at the precinct, Vance pulled Marcus out of the car. The handcuffs were still too tight, cutting off circulation to Marcus's thumbs. Vance marched him through the back intake door, past the holding cells, and up to the booking desk. The precinct was busy. Phones were ringing, officers were typing reports. Behind the high desk sat Desk Sergeant Thomas O'Malley. O'Malley was 58 years old, a career cop with 30 years on the job. He had seen it all. He had tired eyes and a mustache that had gone completely gray. He looked up as Vance shoved Marcus toward the counter. "What do we have, Vance?" O'Malley asked, his eyes immediately scanning the prisoner. He saw the torn shirt, the dirt, the blood on the cheek. But more importantly, he saw the way the man stood. Shoulders back, chin up, eyes forward. Not looking at the floor like a criminal, not looking around like a trapped animal. He was standing at attention. "Burglary suspect," Vance said, placing his paperwork on the counter. Caught him tearing apart a fence at a residence on Maple Drive. Refused ID, resisted arrest. Had to go hands-on. O'Malley looked at Vance, then back at Marcus. He saw the Fort Benning t-shirt. He saw the scars on Marcus's arms, shrapnel scars. O'Malley had served in the Marines in the late 80s. He knew the look. "Did you search him?" O'Malley asked. "Not fully yet. Just a pat down for weapons," Vance said. O'Malley stood up and walked around the desk. He approached Marcus. "Sir, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "I have a contusion on my right knee and likely a rotator cuff strain," Marcus said crisply. "But I do not require an ambulance. I require a competent supervisor." Vance rolled his eyes. "He's been running his mouth the whole time. Claims he lives there." O'Malley ignored Vance. He looked at Marcus's hands behind his back. "I'm going to check your wallet now, sir. Is that all right? Left back pocket, Sergeant, Marcus said. O'Malley reached in and pulled out a leather wallet. He opened it. The first thing he saw was a Georgia driver's license. He pulled it out. Address, 4205 Maple Drive, O'Malley read aloud. He looked at the booking sheet Vance had started. Location of arrest, 4205 Maple Drive. The room went quiet. O'Malley dug deeper into the wallet. He pulled out a blue ID card, a retired military ID. He looked at the rank, E9, Command Sergeant Major. O'Malley slowly closed the wallet. He turned to Officer Vance. His face was not angry. It was something worse. It was disappointed. It was the look of a man watching a train wreck he couldn't stop. Vance, O'Malley said softly, you arrested this man for burglary. At his own house. He wouldn't show me ID. Vance protested, his voice rising in panic. He was resisting. The neighbor called it in. You arrested a sergeant major, O'Malley continued, in his own driveway, for fixing his own fence. He fits the description, Vance shouted. He fits the description of the homeowner. O'Malley slammed the wallet down on the counter. Take these cuffs off, now. I'm not taking them off until he's processed, Vance said, doubling down, his career flashing before his eyes. He resisted. Lieutenant, O'Malley shouted toward the back offices. Lieutenant Henderson, front desk, now. Lieutenant Sarah Henderson walked out. She was the watch commander, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes. She took in the scene immediately. The red-faced young officer, the stoic older man in handcuffs, and the furious desk sergeant. Report, Henderson barked. O'Malley handed her the ID and the license. Vance brought in a burglary suspect. The suspect is the homeowner. He's a retired Army E9. Vance tackled him for refusing to show ID on his own private property. Henderson looked at the IDs. She looked at Marcus. She walked around the desk and stood directly in front of Vance. Give me the key, she said. Lieutenant, give me the key. Vance handed it over, his hands trembling. Henderson stepped behind Marcus and unlocked the cuffs. As soon as they clicked open, Marcus brought his hands forward, rubbing his wrists. They were deeply indented, the skin broken in 2 places. Sergeant Major, Henderson said, her tone respectful and apologetic. I am Lieutenant Henderson. On behalf of this department, I apologize. This should not have happened. Marcus looked at her. He didn't smile. Lieutenant, I want to file a formal complaint. I want the body camera footage secured immediately before it can be deleted or lost. And I want to know why your officer thinks the Constitution doesn't apply to men who look like me. It will be secured, sir. I assure you, Henderson said. She turned to Vance. Officer Vance, surrender your badge and your service weapon. What? You can't be serious. Vance stepped back. I followed protocol. You profiled a homeowner, you escalated a non-emergency situation, and you used force against a senior citizen without cause. Henderson said, her voice icy. Badge and gun, on the counter. You are on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Get out of my lobby. Vance looked around the room. Other officers were staring at him. Some were shaking their heads. He realized, finally, that he was alone. Slowly, he unclipped his gun belt and placed it on the counter. He took off his badge and set it next to the gun. He looked at Marcus one last time, expecting to see a gloating smile. But Marcus wasn't looking at him. Marcus was looking at his wrists, checking the damage. Vance was no longer relevant to him. Vance was just a broken tool that had been discarded. As Vance walked out the glass doors in his undershirt stripped of his authority, Marcus turned to the desk sergeant. Sergeant, Marcus said, I need a ride home. I have a fence to finish. The fallout was swift, but the damage was done. The video from Robert Sullivan's phone hit the internet before Marcus had even returned home. It showed the entire interaction, the calm veteran, the screaming officer, the tackle, the arrest. It went viral within hours. Veteran arrested for fixing fence, became the headline on every national news network. The investigation that followed was thorough. It revealed not just Vance's misconduct, but a pattern of supervision failures that allowed him to remain on the force despite prior complaints. But this time, they couldn't sweep it under the rug. The victim was a decorated war hero with a spotless record and the articulate demeanor of a leader. The city settled the civil rights lawsuit for $4.8 million. Marcus didn't want the money for himself. He donated a significant portion to a legal defense fund for veterans and victims of police misconduct. Officer Kyle Vance was terminated 3 weeks later. The review board found that he had violated 14 departmental policies, including unlawful arrest, excessive use of force, and conduct unbecoming. He was decertified by the State Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. Brenda Miller, the neighbor who made the call, faced her own reckoning. While she wasn't charged with a crime, being a biased busybody isn't technically illegal, she was named in the lawsuit and socially ostracized. The sold sign she had ignored became a symbol of her own ignorance. She moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. 6 months after the incident, Marcus stood in his driveway. The fence was finished, the cedar planks stained a rich, warm brown. The sun was shining. It was quiet. He ran his hand along the smooth wood of the post where he had been tackled. The physical bruises had healed, but the memory lingered. He thought about the uniform he had worn for 30 years. He thought about the oath he had taken to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. He had defended it in deserts and jungles, only to have it trampled in his own front yard by a man who wore a badge like a costume. Justice had been served in a legal sense. But Marcus knew that for every Sergeant Major Holloway who had the rank, the poise, and the witnesses to fight back there were thousands of others who didn't. Young men who would have panicked. People who didn't have a lawyer living next door. He looked across the street at the empty house where Brenda used to live. He looked down the street where children were playing. He picked up his tools and walked back toward his garage. He was home. He was safe. But he would never look at a police car the same way again. And that was a loss that no settlement check could ever restore. True respect is not demanded at gunpoint. It is earned through character. When we allow fear and bias to dictate how we treat our neighbors, we dismantle the very community we claim to protect. What do you think should happen to neighbors who make false reports based on bias? And should police officers be required to carry personal liability insurance for misconduct? If you believe in justice and accountability, please subscribe and share this story. Let's keep the light of truth shining. de-escalation.